watch Game of Thrones and The House of the Dragon back to back, one thing becomes crystal clear. There are two wars happening at the same time, and that is why no one can win. The first war is between the families. Lannister, Baratheon, Stark, Tyrell, spokes on a wheel. The second war is the war on women. It's the internal conflict in every family. The fact that no one is safe, but all the men in the show still find time to undermine the women in their families. Nobody wins the Game of Thrones because no one is focused on fighting one war, and you can't win both. Ned Stark is often remembered as the most honorable man in Westeros. But let's be real, honor didn't kill Ned Stark. His biggest mistake wasn't trusting Cersei, it was not listening to Catelyn. He ignored her when she warned him about not going to King's Landing, which is how it all started. But even before that, he undermined Catelyn when he kept the parentage of Jon Snow a secret, forcing her to live with pain and shame, and she didn't deserve that. Do you honestly believe that if he had told Catelyn that Jon is a Targaryen, she would go and tell Robert? I don't think so. In fact, he didn't even have to tell her the whole story. He could have just said, "It's not my child, but we have to pretend he is." And get with the program. That's it. It would have spared her a lot of pain, and you know what? It would have protected Jon from Catelyn's cruelty, to the point that he would not have to leave Winterfell. But none of that mattered to Ned. Robert's approval was way more important to Ned than his own family. If he trusted Catelyn, truly trusted her, the Starks would not have to go through what they did. He wasn't honorable. He was a people pleaser, too afraid to say no to his friend, even when his family's safety was on the line. That's not nobility, that's weakness. Let's talk about the Lannisters. They are a mess. Tywin Lannister has no empathy. We already know that. To him, Cersei is just a 3D printer, Jaime is wasted potential, and Tyrion is a dwarf. Which is worse than being a woman, because at least women you can marry off and breed for leverage. His misogyny is so bold that it overshadows Jaime and Tyrion's disregard for Cersei. We think Jaime is in love with Cersei, but let's be honest, if he loved his sister, he would not be sleeping with her. This is not just a dysfunctional family, it's worse. Cersei, despite her overt cruelty, has little to no agency in this family. And isn't it interesting that Jaime's love for her only appears when he is crossing a boundary, not when it comes to protecting Cersei from Robert, her abusive husband who served no purpose at all? Another thing that really stood out to me is that Jaime didn't care about the kids. The only person who may have cared about the kids other than Cersei was Tyrion, despite Cersei lashing out at him for sending Myrcella away. His intentions were not bad. Myrcella was safest in Dorne, not because the people in Dorne are nice, but because King's Landing was turning into a mess, and because the marriage alliance would benefit the Martells, so they would have to keep her alive. See how Jaime is not even a part of this? I get that he was captured and that got in the way of his plans, but I don't see any active participation from Jaime when it comes to the kids. And Cersei, all she cares about is the kids. What is going on with him and Cersei? I mean, what they're doing is wrong, but it's just so weird. You almost don't see how bad it is until later when you realize he didn't even care about the kids. Cersei has a lot of internalized misogyny. Cersei's hatred for women is a direct outcome of her family's hatred for women. And that includes Jaime and Tyrion. Jaime treats Cersei like she's a loose cannon, Mind you, she has tendencies, but is it fair to say that she's insane and paranoid after all three of her kids died terribly? And the Red Keep isn't exactly the safest place for kids. She was paranoid about Marcella because she thought what happened to Sansa under her supervision and what happened to Ilya and the kids would happen to Marcella in Dorne. Not only does she hate women, but she also realizes that this could happen to her. Tyrion isn't the worst offender when it comes to women, and that's partially because he knows what it feels like to be treated as less than, but in his own way, he sees himself as superior to Cersei, and he justifies it with education. But I don't think that is true. Yes, his political strategies are better than hers, but is it entirely because of the books? The reason why his strategies work is because he doesn't trust anyone. And Cersei doesn't trust anyone either. The books that he reads helps him manage his distrust, but they don't cause it. His distrust of the world is different from Cersei's distrust of the world because she has the perspective of a woman. Why is it that when he does it, it's intelligent, but when she does it, it's crazy? And that's the real curse of House Lannister, their inability to acknowledge Cersei's protective instincts, which, let's be honest, created an unnecessary divide in the family. The Lannisters are not exactly loved or admired. They are isolated because of their cruelty and disregard for people. They don't have the luxury of bickering and turning on each other. The downfall of House Lannister isn't exactly the outcome of incest or murder, it's because they have no unity. And the thing about turning on women is that sometimes the woman in question is Cersei. Remember the line, I choose violence? Well, it should have been, I don't have any other choice. We can't talk about warring families without talking about the Targaryens. This is a family of dragon lords that don't subscribe to a particular religion because they see themselves as gods. Isn't it ironic that they draw their power and superiority from dragons, but the dragons don't care about gender? Vhagar did not pick Aemon because he's a man. He also picked Visenya and Laena. Dragons pick you based on your personality. Aegon the Conqueror didn't take 7 kingdoms all on his own. He ruled with his sisters. That was the foundation of their strength. He could have just married Rhaenys, but that would mean that Visenya would marry someone else, and then some other family, some other house would benefit from the strength of Vhagar. Why would he do that when he could just combine the strength of Vhagar, Meraxes, and Balerion? He knew that uniting the family and the dragons was the only way. Yet generations later, Jaehaerys thought it was a good idea to debate whether a woman could sit on the throne. A lot of people think this is a good idea, that he put off the civil war. I mean, he's literally called the conciliator, but I disagree. The Great Council was the beginning of the end, not because the Targaryens decided to start fighting right after Viserys' death, because the moment they put their Valyrian values aside and allowed patriarchy to infect them, they were just as good as anyone else. In the words of Olenna herself, the lords of Westeros are sheep. So why do the sheep get to have a say in what the dragons do? That is why they're doomed. Fighting over gender is what commoners do. A brother usurping his sister's throne is what caused the Dance of the Dragons in the first place. But a brother and sister joining forces is how Westeros was conquered in the first place. If Princess Rhaenys had been crowned instead of Viserys, there might never have been a civil war. You know why she deserved to be queen over Viserys? Because when Viserys was crowned, she didn't fight. She prioritized peace. She prioritized the realm. What is leadership if not risk assessment and making a friend when your enemies are banking on you to fight and take each other out so that they would have fewer obstacles? Her friendship with Viserys did not weaken her position. If anyone deserved the credit for maintaining peace, it's Rhaenys, not Jaehaerys. His stupidity caused the dance of the dragons, and thanks to Rhaenys and her foresight, they got more than one generation of peace before it all blew up. The dance of the dragons is proof that you cannot fight internally and externally at the same time. Every house that falls in Westeros falls for the same reason. They treat their women as liabilities instead of leaders. If you put the obvious flaws of the later seasons aside, you can see that one way or another, Jon and Dany would find themselves in a second dance of the dragons. And if we're being hopeful, they would put their differences aside and it would turn into a second conquest. As for season 8, while I don't want to dignify the ending with an analysis, we have to discuss the conflict between Jon and Dany. They ended one show by having dragons fight the Night King beyond the wall, and then released another where there's a whole episode about how the dragons refuse to go beyond the wall, and it means something. They've got everyone acting surprised that Jon is a black-haired Targaryen, and by everyone I mean Dany, who studied Targaryen history extensively and is no stranger to the dance of the dragons, not to mention is a dragon rider herself and knows how all of this works. But I guess that Jon is just lucky because he got to pet Drogon, and it's coincidence that Rhaegar looked at him and decided he wasn't a sandwich. Even if we ignore all of that, why is everyone acting like Jon being a Targaryen automatically counts as a threat? Because the last time I checked, Targaryens marry each other, especially when there aren't a lot of them to begin with. Even during the height of Targaryen civil war, there were marriage alliances being made to preserve the bloodline. Even after the dragons were gone, they still married each other in hopes that preserving the magic, preserving the bloodline would bring back the dragons. So even the most recent Targaryens, such as Dany's own parents, were siblings who were married to each other. So she was raised thinking she would marry Viserys, her brother. So ideally, a male dragon riding consort should be something she welcomes. She was prepared to enter a marriage alliance in Westeros. That is what she said to Dario when she asked him to stay back. So you're telling me that she would just look at a dragon-riding Targaryen consort that would strengthen her claim that she's already hooking up with as a threat? Jon being a Targaryen would also strengthen Sansa's claim to Winterfell. So it didn't make sense that Sansa would be anti-Daenerys. Even before she found out about Jon's real parents, Dany's dragons were a certain threat to Cersei. So if Dany had to take the Seven Kingdoms alone, it would benefit Sansa. Why would she be against her? Let's put more logic aside. Littlefinger would not express his honest feelings by acting cold and cruel towards his enemies. He would conceal how he really feels until such time as he has the advantage. So why would his student Sansa act cold towards Daenerys, a dragon-riding threat? I mean, it's quite literally the dumbest thing imaginable. There are so many things that I hate about the last season, and it's so disappointing. What I hate the most is the fact that the writers made a clear admission of their misogyny, to the point that the entire show lost its meaning. The conflict between Jon and Dany is not the problem. It's how they make the conflict seem like a battle between absolute good and absolute evil, when it should have been a culmination of the Targaryen dynasty, where the only Targaryens and dragon riders left get to decide if they will be the last Targaryens and dragon riders, or if they will put their internal conflict aside and rule for years to come. The conflict would be one where Jon and Dany decide once and for all if they're sheep or if they're dragons. But I guess that didn't matter to them. Even though the last season and especially the last episode, were terrible, they did one thing right, and that was tell the audience that the Iron Throne is not the real prize. Stability is the prize, longevity is the prize, and the throne is just a test to see if you will let gender get in the way or if you will rise above it.